So, good morning. Welcome to Monday. Exciting weekend, Kenny? Yeah?
Yeah.
Get out of town. What'd you do?
Like, it's going to be the new year, so I just realized I like to, having some matching and eating.
Right. Right, that makes sense. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, Happy New Year. Yeah. That's kind of cool. Yeah, I forgot about that. I know lots of students I asked have just had a very quiet, relaxing, sleepy weekend, but yeah, I guess if you're celebrating New Year, that's kind of fun and exciting, maybe. Yeah, okay, let's get started. I saw this this morning on Instagram, and I just thought I would share it. Not that, but this here. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about that. Henry Ford's introduction of the sort of standard 8-hour, 5-day work week. And of course somebody responded, "Everyone boo this man," which of course is funny, but also not true, right? Because people actually worked longer hours before that, right? People were working like 6 days a week, 10 or 12 hours a day. And so it was actually Henry Ford that kind of cut it down to, a shorter amount of work and something that's kind of the standard now. So yeah, don't boo this man. Actually, thank him. Otherwise, maybe we'd be working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. However, it'll be interesting to see, maybe our work weeks will get shorter, right? Lots of people are talking about 4-day work weeks, right? So maybe that will happen. Anybody in favor? 4-day work week? 3-day weekend all the time? No? No takers? Nobody wants that? Come on.
If we're going to make it to 4 days, our working hours will be longer, and 8 hours long enough already. Just imagine you work and we study here for like 10 hours a day.
Well, I don't think they would do that. So it would be 4 days a week, but it would be like 8 hours a day. So it'd be the same work day, just an extra day off a week. Anybody? We'll see. To be honest, I think we will get there eventually, but no, maybe not yet. But anyway, don't boo this man, because he did a good thing, right? He gave us less work to do. Well, you could probably boo him for other reasons, but we won't. We don't need to go into that. Okay, so on Thursday, I guess it was, of course, we were talking about Hitler. We watched a documentary on Hitler on Thursday, I guess it was, Wednesday, Thursday. And we said, of course, that the Weimar Government in Germany in the 1920s was having all kinds of issues, right? They were having economic issues. They were trying to figure out how they were going to make those reparations through the Treaty of Versailles. They were trying to get their economy reorganized because, of course, your sort of wartime economy is different from your peacetime economy, and so they're trying to transition into that. The Weimar government is kind of brand new, right? It's a sort of a brand new democratic government. The Kaiser has left. They're trying to deal with that. Of course, the people are upset and unhappy, right? They feel that they've been stabbed in the back and they've been sort of screwed over in the Treaty of Versailles, which they kind of have been. So the people don't really support the government. We know that people are trying to overthrow the government left and right. We know that some people actually succeed for a short period, right? Some communists overthrow the government for, a number of days before they get thrown out again. So it's a pretty chaotic time, right? And the government here really has its hands full just trying to govern, right? Trying to run the country. And out of that kind of chaos comes this guy, and it seems that, he doesn't really seem that remarkable in his early life, right? It seems that based on what we know about him as a student, in school, he was just kind of so-so, right? There wasn't really anything remarkable about him. I think in the documentary we saw on Thursday, they said, he didn't really focus very well on a lot of things, and so things he was interested in, he did, read avidly, but his education was kind of pretty average, right? Pretty so-so. We know that he comes from a family where his father might have been kind of abusive, but his mother was, very protective of him and sort of probably spoiled him, I guess you could say. But kind of not that much notable happens. He goes off to war. He kind of distinguishes himself there. He gets awarded a couple of Iron Crosses for bravery, which is pretty good, I think. But if you remember from the documentary on Thursday, they mentioned that the interesting thing is that even though he got a couple of medals, he was never really promoted. And the historians were saying it's probably because people didn't see him as a good leader, which is kind of funny and ironic in the end, but he didn't get promoted because they didn't think he was a good leader. Of course, the war was over. He continued to work for the army and got a job sort of spying on one of these political parties, right? Because of course, these smaller political parties are trying to overthrow the government. The government wants to know what's going on at these meetings, right? Who should they worry about? And so Adolf Hitler is sent to spy on the German Workers' Party. He attends a few meetings, and then he kind of gets the idea that, I could do something with this, right? These guys sort of share some of my values, some of my feelings. I could be at home here, right? And so instead of spying on the party, he joins it, and then eventually becomes the head of propaganda, the head of kind of advertising for them, and then becomes their leader, right? He rebrands it, gives it a uniform, gives it a logo, gives it a new name, right? The National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazis for short, and then starts to lead this party toward power, right? And it's a long road, right? Because here you can see it's probably 1919 when he joins the party, but he's really not going to have any real power until 1933. So it's going to be a 14-year sort of struggle for him to get into power. So it doesn't happen quickly, right? This guy's around for a long time. He doesn't really come out of nowhere. So we said that he leads the party, and one of the things that they do in his first few years as leader is he launches an attempt to overthrow the government, right? And so in the German, that's called a putsch. In French, it's called a coup. I guess in English, it's called an overthrow. They try to overthrow the Bavarian government. Like we said, it doesn't really go well. The Nazis are hoping that the police will side with them and help them out, and that the government workers will do so as well. But it doesn't happen, right? They don't sympathize with the Nazis. Some of the Nazis get machine gunned. Everybody runs away. Hitler gets arrested and goes to jail for a short period, right? As it turns out, he doesn't really go to jail for long because the judge is actually a Nazi sympathizer. So the judge actually agrees with Hitler's ideas and what he's trying to do, but of course, as a judge, he can't not sentence him to something. So he gets a very short sentence. It's supposed to be 5 years. He's out in, I think, 11 months. And he's kind of, even though he's prohibited from speaking in public, right? So, let's see. Sorry, 9 months, not 11. When he's in jail, he writes this book, Mein Kampf. And again, it's not a great book. I haven't read the whole thing. I've read chunks of it. It's hard to read because, as I say, it's very rambling. It's kind of like a rant. It's like a long rant. And so it's difficult to read, but the notable part of this book is that all of the things that he kind of thinks and says and does later, most of them are kind of in this book, right? So my point here is that nobody should have been really surprised by what Hitler did, because he was very clear about what he thought from the beginning, right? He didn't hide his feelings away and then, reveal them once he got into power. He was, he had these ideas from the very beginning. He was very consistent in what he believed and what he said, right? So again, people maybe shouldn't have been shocked by what happened in the end, but they were shocked anyway, I think. So in this book is his thoughts on power, his thoughts on the German race being, the greatest race and an Aryan race, his thoughts on how non-Germans are kind of, inferior and far less than the German race, and how they should be removed from society. He talks about this idea of Jewish Bolshevism, which is a very interesting thing. Now, we kind of know what Jewish people are, but what's Bolshevism? Bolshevism. No? What he's referring to here are the Bolsheviks, and we haven't gotten to them yet, but they're the political party that's going to overthrow the government in Russia and create a communist state. So the communists in Russia, Vladimir Lenin's party, that's the Bolsheviks. And so Hitler, we'll get to this later, but Hitler's kind of combining two enemies, right? Not real enemies, but he sees the Jewish people as an enemy. He thinks they're behind the scenes, pulling the strings, controlling the world. And then he takes the threat of communist revolution, which people are afraid of, and he sort of combines them, he mixes them up together and says, oh, it's not just the Jews and it's not just the Bolsheviks, it's Jewish Bolshevism, which is not really a thing, but he kind of invents it, right? He kind of makes it. And again, he says in Mein Kampf, one of the things that you should do if you want to be a leader is take multiple enemies and make them seem like they're one enemy, right? And so this is kind of a strategy to kind of simplify sort of good and bad, us versus them, right? We don't have, 10 or 12 problems, we just have one, and he lumps them all together into one thing, right? And we often see this with modern populist leaders, dictators, demagogues. They try to combine everything into one. And to be honest, you can still hear this kind of thing happening. Did anyone have any watch or hear anything about that sort of convoy of truckers that went to Ottawa this weekend? Did anyone hear about it at all? You guys are in a different media landscape than us, but
Too busy to watch news.
the what?
Too busy to watch news.
You're too busy to watch news? That could be. I'll catch you up very quickly. The idea was that a few people who drive trucks for a living, the big delivery trucks, they felt that the Canadian government's requirement that they be vaccinated to go over the border with the United States, they didn't like that. They didn't like that the Canadian government made that decision, even though the American government said the same thing. So you can't sort of cross the border without being vaccinated anyway. Some of these truckers decided they were going to drive to Ottawa, our nation's capital, to protest, but that protest seems to have been taken over by a lot of right-wing crazies. It seems to have been taken over by them. And so when you hear them speak, you'll often hear this kind of thing. They're not talking about Jewish Bolshevism, but they're combining all kinds of things and making them into one big conspiracy, right? What are they there protesting? Well, they're there protesting the government and Trudeau and vaccine mandates, and they're standing up for truckers, and they're fighting for freedom, and they're standing up against big pharma, and what else is there in there? The media, right? The media is a virus, right? And so they're against the media. And they're kind of like lumping them all together into one thing, right? So they're not just there protesting one thing, it's everything. And they think everything is kind of connected, right? And everything is kind of, someone is somehow orchestrating this whole thing, right? And it's a kind of a classic conspiracy theory, but it's exactly what Hitler did, right? Hitler took a bunch of problems and a bunch of enemies and made them one, right? And then he positioned himself as the person who could deliver Germany from this terrible thing, right? So again, you often see people who are trying to take power or to sort of stir up anger or resentment. They'll take a bunch of problems or enemies and they'll try to make them into one. They'll try to make them into one thing. And Hitler does that. Oh yeah. So when we watched the video and we kind of got to the point where just to the point where he's about to step into power, right? And so we didn't hear it it came up in the documentary that didn't really work very well for us, but Hitler tried to overthrow the government. It didn't work, right? He got thrown in jail, his followers were machine gunned, and he said, well, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to enter parliament. We're going to have to enter the democracy. We're going to have to hold our noses, right? Because it stinks so much. We're going to have to hold our noses and be elected. He says, we're not a parliamentary party. We're not a democratic party. But at least if we get elected, then our power will be guaranteed by their own system. And eventually we'll have a majority. And when we have a majority, we'll have parliament, and when we have parliament, we'll have Germany, right? So he's not democratic, right? He's not interested in democracy. He's interested in autocracy, right? He's interested in a dictatorship, but he's going to play the democracy game, right? He's going to play the game until he's powerful enough to throw the rules out the window, which is exactly what he's going to do, right? So pages 44 and 45 talk about his rise to power. And specifically, it talks about the idea of how he was able to come to power. So in this little section, the textbook is going to talk about, I forget if it's 3 or 4, it might be 4 authors who make an argument about why he became powerful, okay? Why he became who he became. And so what I want you to do is read this section, of course, but pay attention to those 4 arguments, okay? Why did Hitler become powerful in the first place? There's 4 different perspectives on this. So read it over, answer those 4 questions, then we'll talk about what those are. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are too, what you think is the most compelling argument, okay? just a couple more minutes and then we'll continue. Hey, good morning, Ryan. One more minute, and then we'll talk. Oh, okay. So, again, just in this little case study here, it's a summary of a few different arguments of why and how Hitler comes to power, right? And so there's three arguments. Mir, maybe start me off with the first one. What's the first argument? Yeah.
The first question?
Yep. Well, more like the first argument. So what's the first kind of, it's Alan Bullock's argument.
He says that the reason he had the Nazis had so much trust in him and they trusted him and his person was because of his energy and his oratory attracted people too.
Yeah. So they point out his oratory, right? His speech giving abilities, which were quite good, right? He was a good performer on the stage, a good speaker. He was kind of very charismatic in that way. And so the Nazis were kind of drawn to him. But what's Bullock kind of saying about the Nazi movement? And the Nazis gaining power. What's responsible for that, Kenny?
I'm not really sure.
Not really sure?
No.
Okay. Anna, can you help us out?
Well, I think it's because Hitler, like with his oratory, he tend to use like the emotional and rational side of the people.
Right. Yeah, they mentioned that as well, right? He knows how to sort of press people's emotional buttons, right? He's not talking from kind of a rational, logical place. He's talking from the heart, right? Or at least from emotion anyway. Yeah, that's very true. Regina, what else is being said here by Alan Bullock? Well, about why the Nazis were able to come to power. Yeah, right. That's kind of the conclusion of Bullock's argument, right? The Nazis came to power because of Hitler, right? Bullock is saying that without Hitler, no Nazis, right? The German Workers' Party never would have amounted to anything, right? Nobody would have heard of them. They wouldn't have become popular. None of that stuff would have happened, right? The Nazis never would have happened without Hitler, right? And again, we know that he was, good at propaganda and marketing. We know he was a powerful speaker. We know he was able to kind of speak to people's emotions, especially their anger and their fear and their, desire to make Germany a powerful, great country again. He was able to do all of those things, right? And so Bullock is saying, why did the Nazis come to power? Well, it's all about Hitler, right? No Hitler, no Nazis, none of that stuff, right? But who's our next person here? Taylor, that's a lot of initials, A.J.P. Taylor. Taylor has kind of a different argument. What's he saying? Kai, what's he saying about why the Nazis came to power? Okay, so kind of in your own words and maybe in simpler English, what's Taylor saying there? Because that's kind of the conclusion of his argument, but let's make it a little more simple. Why did the Nazis come to power? Because Kenny, what do you think?
They can be strong enough and good enough leaders to attract people emotionally and bring them to want to go through all the things that they're experiencing.
Yeah, because what's he saying about the Germans just as a people? They're not really
Going for democracy.
Yeah.
They're good but still for the old ways that they have experienced.
Yeah, they're not really into democracy, right? They've always had, historically they've always had a strong military leader, at the controls of their country. They kind of like that, right? They respect that order of government. That's kind of really what they want, right? And even though they get a democracy at the end of World War I, they kind of, they're like, okay, we got a democracy, whatever.
So they just get beat up by the democracy countries. There's no reason they would just accept it.
Yeah, they just got defeated by democratic countries. They get a democracy. They don't really want it. And then does it work really well? Not really, right? So the Germans are they kind of want a strongman leader, right? And it says here that they actually look at von Hindenburg as that strong leader, right? He's the chancellor. He's not really supposed to be, he's not really supposed to be a military dictator, but the German people are kind of thinking of him that way anyway, right? And then when the democracy is breaking down and it's not working, the chancellor starts ruling by decree, right? They're just making decisions. But of course, the Germans are mostly okay with that because it's kind of what they want, right? They want to go back to the way it was with a strong military leader. So Taylor's saying something about the way that the Germans are, right? The Germans kind of want a strongman military leader. And if that's who they wanted, then one would appear, right? If you're looking for that kind of leader, one will appear, and he will gain power because the people will want him to gain power, right? The people are looking for that kind of guy. And so here Hitler appeared and he gained power. And Taylor is saying if another guy appeared, then he would have taken power. But ultimately that's kind of what the Germans were looking for, right? They were looking for a return to a single powerful leader, right? They were just looking for that guy. And there he was, right? But no Hitler, somebody else, right? Somebody else would have risen to the top, because that's what Germany wanted, right? Not a democracy. And then the last guy is Ritter, right? And what's Ritter saying? Why did the Nazis gain power? Because, you want to help me out with this one, Regina? Why? What's Ritter saying? Interesting. That this dictatorship and Nazism is actually a product of the democratic system. And why does he say that? Say that last part again.
If like a minority party like the Nazis wouldn't have exist if it's not a democratic country.
Right. So autocracies, right, or monarchies, they don't really have a bunch of political parties. That's something that democracies have. Right? Democracies have multiple parties. But if you have a monarchy, if you have a king, do you have political parties? If you have a constitutional monarchy, maybe, but usually not. If you have a dictator, do you have other political parties? No, those guys get executed or thrown in jail, right? There's no other political parties in a dictatorship. In a sort of a communist dictatorship like the Soviet Union, are there other political parties? No, there are not, right? So really a party like the Nazis, even they started small and they grew, but really the only way they could have done that was within a democracy. Any other political system either doesn't have political parties or they would have been shut down, right, from day one. So Ritter is saying, well, it's actually democracy that brings these guys to power, right? And so it's not so much about Hitler, and it's not so much about the character of the Germans, it's about democracy itself, right? And there was this kind of feeling, people were upset at the time, they wanted change, they wanted to regain their place as a powerful nation in Europe, and they were looking for someone to take them there. And here appeared this guy who seemed like that's what he wanted to do, and so they voted him in, right? They voted his party into power. And so here, Bullock is saying it's all about Hitler, right? Taylor is saying it's all about the German character, and Ritter is saying it's all about democracy, right? When you have democracy, you have the possibility that, you know, a party will become popular and they will take power, right? And in this case, you know, they were just another political party and they gained power. But my question to you, of course, is what do you think? which argument here do you think is most compelling or most correct or most significant? Which one is kind of more important? Is it Hitler? Is it the German character? Or is it democracy itself? Who thinks it's Hitler? It's all Hitler. All Hitler all the time. Okay. Who thinks, I shouldn't put my arm up like that and talk about Hitler. That's really bad. Didn't mean to do that. Apologies. That was a hand up. That wasn't a handout. Who thinks it's about the German character? German character. Okay. Who thinks it's democracy? That's how democracy works. Parties gain support and they're voted in. Okay. So interesting, most of you think it's Hitler, hey? And then they mention a few other things, right? There's other historians who say, well, you know, part of it had to do with the social conditions in Germany, right? Things were so bad, so chaotic, so many people were without jobs and their currency had, you know, kind of collapsed and inflation. If people weren't so miserable, they wouldn't have turned to this guy in the first place. Maybe. What else did they mention here? Oh yeah, they mentioned the industrialists and the landowners that pay off the Nazis' debts and kind of support Hitler as he takes the office of chancellor. Without those guys, maybe the Nazis would have collapsed, right? Maybe their loans would have been called in, they would have been bankrupt, and then they wouldn't have been able to do anything, right? But again, these kind of wealthy factory owners and landowners, they pumped a bunch of money into the Nazis, right? In exchange for Hitler kind of leaving them alone after he gained power. So maybe without them, maybe the Nazi movement would have gained popularity, but then it just would have fallen apart because it had no more money to accomplish its goals. It's probably all of these things, right? They all have a part to play, but it's, you know, the argument is like, what's more important? Right? What's more significant? There's not a perfect comparability between Hitler and Trump, but what do you think? Do you think some of these arguments might apply to Donald Trump as well? Because you could ask the same question, right? How did someone like Donald Trump gain power? And you could come up with similar arguments. Right? You could say, well, it was about him, right? He was the right guy. He was charismatic. People liked to listen to him. He was saying the right kinds of things, right? You could say something about American society and where it was kind of at the time, right? You could say, well, it's a product of democracy, right? He was voted in and people supported him, right? The values they had, the things they wanted to see were the things that Trump was talking about. What do you think? Why do you think Trump got into office? Or do we have like no? I don't.
Do the people randomly get some luck to get a little bit more votes than others, and that could become president?
So there's a little bit of luck involved.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's luck. It's more like, he's a businessman.
Yep.
He has more resources and people who have knowns as friends that might have more benefits for him as getting voted.
Yeah. He's certainly, yeah. Well, and that's important too, right? He's certainly wealthy enough and connected enough, right? Running for president is not a cheap thing, right? You need millions and millions of dollars in advertising and staff to pay staff and to do campaign visits, and all that stuff is really expensive, right? You need millions and millions of dollars. But Trump not only has millions of dollars, but also has a lot of connections with people who have millions and millions of dollars. I don't know about all of you, I won't ask, but I personally don't know anyone with millions and millions of dollars, right? So it might be hard for me to raise enough money to run for president because I just don't know those people, but he does. What else do you think? Anna, what do you think?
I don't know, maybe he's the right thing
He was certainly saying things that people agreed with, right? Or he said he was feeling the way that some people felt. I guess a lot of people felt, right? He almost got half of the vote, right? Tens of millions of people voted for him, so he was saying things that resonated with people. Yeah. What else do you think? Why do you think he got into power?
But it's also about America, because at that period of time, undoubtable, this America is definitely worse than before and not as like it's still the strongest country of the world.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not the most let's say like effects have like strong effect to others, like when they speak, of course, but if you look at America's like a few years ago,
Yeah.
they actually become weaker and weaker because the government just doing nothing and just being a nice guy.
Yeah.
And when Donald Trump come out, he say, no, we are Americans. We're going to do some things about China, it's about Asia, part of the world.
Yeah.
And yeah, that actually is making America a little bit better. Not everything, but yeah, it does make it better in economies.
Yeah.
And you can see the strategies of how the United States Navy is right now. They're setting out more, they're building more, they have more weapons. They have a part of the reason is about Donald Trump making the economies better to afford that kind of thing, right? It's expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an economic piece, but yeah, in terms of global power, that's a real concern, I think, for the Americans, right? Because after the Soviet Union kind of comes apart, the Americans are kind of the only superpower left, right? There's really no one that can, like, in let's say 1990, there's nobody that can challenge the US, right? China certainly can't. Russia's a complete disaster in 1990. And they're really the sole power, right? They can almost do whatever they want, sort of thing. But in recent years, we're seeing that, it's American power seems to be decreasing a little bit, but we're seeing other countries rise up, right? China's much more powerful than it used to be. Russia's kind of flexing its muscles a little bit more. And yeah, like on a kind of global power front, the US has been a lot weaker than they have been in the past, right? And that can make Americans feel threatened, right? Feeling like they're losing their power, losing their place in the world, right? And Trump came into power saying he was going to make America great again, right? And that sort of global power thing is probably part of that idea, or at least it could have been for some people. Do you think that all of those rich people who probably donated to Donald Trump's election fund, do you think maybe they expected something from him, just like the wealthy industrialists did with Hitler? Do you think they felt maybe, gee, if we vote in one of our own, maybe he'll help us out with low corporate taxes and things like that?
Well, that's at least it will become worse because Donald Trump has his own business.
Yeah. Right. Donald Trump is one of them, right? He's a wealthy industrialist, Donald Trump. So if we vote him in, surely he won't do anything to hurt wealthy businessmen because he's a wealthy businessman, right? So it's not quite the same as Hitler, but probably the wealthy supported Trump because they thought Trump would protect their interests, just like the industrialists thought that Hitler would help them protect their interests. So even though, I wouldn't say that we could compare Hitler and Trump directly, a lot of these arguments probably hold true for Trump as well, right? He was, he's a certain kind of guy, right? And people seem to like to listen to him speak. I don't know why, but some people do, right? He did come to power through a democracy, but he was supported by the rich and the powerful. But he also said things that resonated with people emotionally, right? Whether it was, just the way he talked to people, or whether it was the idea that people felt America had slipped, right, had become worse, and he was going to make it great again somehow, whatever great meant, but he was going to do that. So again, it's interesting, right? Because again, Hitler and Trump are not the same person. They're difficult to compare, but they do come to power in some similar ways, right? And again, it's difficult to know which thing was the most important for him. Yeah, and maybe the last thing I'll say before I give you a break here is it's interesting to read this case study too, because remember when we talked about World War I, and we said it would be very easy to say, why did World War I start? Oh, it was Franz Ferdinand, right? He was assassinated, and then the war started. But it started the war, but it wasn't really a main cause of it. Well, it was, but there was a lot of other ones as well, right? There was the unrest in the Balkans, and there was militarism, and there was the alliance system, right? All of that other stuff was happening in the background, and then we got sort of a catalyst, a thing that set the whole thing off. And here it's the same thing, right? We have a very kind of driven, charismatic individual, but we also have a lot of other things going on in the background, right? And we probably shouldn't forget some of the guys that were around Hitler who we were introduced to in the film as well, right? Like Joseph Goebbels, or Hermann Hesse, or Heinrich Himmler, right? Or is it Hermann Hesse or Rudolf Hess? I think it's Rudolf Hess. Those guys were instrumental in kind of figuring out the Nazi approach and putting it into practice, right? So, yeah, Hitler was in the driver's seat, but there were a bunch of guys in the seat right beside him going in the same direction, right? So it was a lot of Hitler, but he had some very strong supporters sitting right next to him, helping him out, right? And so, it's not just him either. But again, it's very easy to focus on one person, right, and see him as the architect of the whole thing, which in some ways he was, right? But okay, you want to take a little break? Okay, let's take a break, and then we'll talk more Hitler, but we'll be getting into the Second World War. So, but take a break first. All right, and we're back. So we've kind of walked through a few arguments about how Hitler comes to power. Again, is it just him? Is he just special and that's why the Nazis gained power? Does it have something to do with German society and their views on government as a whole? Does it have something to do with just the nature of democracy that, small parties can, be saying something that a lot of people agree with and it can bring them into power? And again, all of those things are true, right? There's a case to be made for each one of those things. But which one's more important? Well, I guess that's up to you to decide, right? Because clearly all of them are factors, right? So what I'd like to do is very quickly, is just ask you to read just a quick section of the textbook here, just 2 pages on page 46 and 47, okay? And for those of you online, I actually don't have this, I don't have this in PDF form, so just kind of sit tight, but we'll walk you through it, okay? But for those in class, just read this one section on Hitler's rise to power, and then we'll talk about it, okay? minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll talk. Okay, so this is a short section of the textbook, but man, a lot happens here, right? And it's big, big stuff. In fact, I guess I can understand why they chose to put it in such a small section, but still, there's a lot of important things, right? And it's interesting right off the top, because here, the textbook's actually making another argument about why Hitler comes to power, right? Because we said, in the last pages we read, oh, it was because it was him, it was the German character or their views on governance, it was democracy, it was a grassroots kind of thing. Those were our three arguments. And here the textbook is saying, actually, it was the economic turmoil and collapse that brought Hitler to power, right? Because he says the Nazis had 12 seats in the Reichstag, in the House of Parliament, and it was nothing, right? They had really no power. There was just a sprinkling of Nazis in there. Nobody paid too much attention to them. They didn't really have a lot of power. But in 1928 and into 1929, when the US stock market crashes, the tap that has been pumping money into Germany gets turned off, suddenly things get bad, right? Things get economically, they were bad before, but now they get way worse, right? And what kind of things what's Hitler's platform? What things are, what's Hitler promising to do? What's one thing? There's a list of them there, but what's one thing he says, this is what I'm going to do, or this is what we need to do?
Eliminate the foreign debts.
Yeah, eliminate foreign debts, right? So all of that money we owe other countries, other people, we're not paying those, right? We're canceling them, right? What else does he say?
Back the lands that they have lost in the war.
Yeah, right. All of that land they were forced to give up in the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, we're taking it back, or I want to take it back. What else is he saying?
You want to eliminate Jews?
Right. We're going to, all these people that are, I don't know, holding us back, slowing us down, sabotaging our efforts, whatever it is, those people, we're going to get rid of those people. We're going to remove them from Germany. Anna, what else is he saying?
Overturning the Treaty of Versailles.
Overturning the Treaty of Versailles. You know that thing that we signed and we had no choice? Out the window, right? What else is he saying?
Reaching full employment.
Yeah, right? He's going to invest in public works, right? Infrastructure, roads, bridges, rail lines, things like that. And we're going to have full employment. How good do you think that sounds when 30% of your country is out of work? Full employment sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Yeah, right? What else does he say? There might be one or two more things. What about the reparations? Gone, right? We're not paying those anymore, right? We're going to rearm, We're going to take back our territory. We're going to stop paying debts and paying reparations, and we're going to make Germany great again. Sorry. We're going to make Germany great again, right? That's his promise, right? And again, you can imagine how into it Germany must have felt, right? Because these are all the things that the Weimar government would never have done, right? They're going to keep making their payments. They're going to pay their foreign debts. They're going to abide by the treaty, and they're going to try to somehow make it through. And Hitler is saying, screw all of that. This is what we need to do. We're going to cancel all of our foreign debts. We're not going to listen to the Treaty of Versailles anymore. We're going to do what we want to do.
Well, he did it.
And he did it, right? And so, but again, you can see how attractive that is to people, right? So what's step one? The Nazis have 12 seats, which is nothing. But then by 1930, what happens? They have an election. And all of a sudden, how many seats do the Nazis have? Do they have 230 by then?
No, it's 1932, right?
Oh, that's 32. So in 1930, they have 107, right? Even so, wow. That is a massive increase. I'll tell you, when we have elections here in Canada, we have 338 seats in our parliament. And so, again, if you want to, what's the halfway point? 338, 150, 165. You need about 170 seats for a majority. And so our seat count doesn't really change that much, right? Sometimes there's a slight majority either way. Usually it's the Conservatives and the Liberals. The NDP have some. They have like 30 seats. Sometimes they gain a little bit. Sometimes they lose. But our parliament stays mostly the same, give or take. To gain almost 100 seats in an election, although the Reichstag has more seats than we do, but still, that's a massive uptick in support. I don't think Canada's ever seen anything like that.
I mean, it's like around 900%.
That's a 900% increase, right? Massive, right? Massive show of support. Again, Hitler is on the radio, he's in the newspaper, he's speaking at rallies, he's getting his message out, and the public is responding, right? Just like Ritter argued, democracy is there, right? The people like what he's saying, and they're voting these Nazis in. Then what happens? Then what happens?
He's going to get stronger.
They get stronger, yeah. We see that in 1932, Chancellor Brüning starts ruling by decree, right? So he's making all the decisions. The politicians in the Reichstag can debate things if they want, but he's the one choosing yes or no, right? So they've already kind of lost a little bit of their democracy here anyway, right, with Brüning. Let's see now. Right, and this is where the Nazis run out of money, right? They're running out of money, and who comes to rescue them but wealthy industrialists, right? Factory owners, wealthy landowners. They're worried that the government is going to tax them even more, right? Or maybe even confiscate their things. They definitely don't want a communist revolution because then they'll lose everything, right? And then, so they make a deal with Hitler. They're like, Hitler, if you get into power, then you just leave us alone, right? Don't tax us anymore. Just let us do our thing, right? Hitler agrees. The Nazis' debts are paid off, right? And then the chancellor becomes Kurt von Schleicher, Hindenburg's son. And von Schleicher wants to start investigating the landowners for corruption, right? There's some sort of accusation of corruption. And so the landowners go to Hindenburg and they're like, that's it. We don't want to be investigated. Get rid of von Schleicher. Put in our boy Hitler. right? Because they know that Hitler won't go after them, right? They know that Hitler will protect them. Hindenburg goes along with it, and everybody thinks they can control this guy, right? Everyone thinks that it's okay, we'll keep Hitler on a really short leash, and we won't let him do anything bad, right? And that way we'll all be protected, right? Our business interests will be protected. But as you read, that's not going to happen, right? There's a fire at the Reichstag, right? The parliament building is set on fire. It's not an accidental fire, it's arson, right? Hitler blames the communists. I think there's some evidence that Hitler's Nazis actually might have set the fire themselves and then blamed the communists, but either way, it allows him to scare enough people to pass the Enabling Act. What's the Enabling Act? What does that do? Page 47, the Enabling Act, March 23rd, 1933. Mir, what's it say there?
He gave Hitler power to rule by decree for 4 years without the Reichstag's approval.
Right. So now he's been able to make himself, or he's been able to scare everyone into making him a dictator for 4 years, right? But as you read after that, he's not really going to need 4 years, right? Because what does he start doing? What's basically the first thing he does?
He abolishes all the political parties.
Right, which again is, we said that the Nazis couldn't have appeared in any other system but a democracy because other systems would destroy other political parties. And what does he do? First thing he does is outlaws all political parties, right? Sets up a court for people who disagree with the government, right? What's he do next? Let's see, Anna, what's he do? Right. Anyone, so he outlaws all other political parties, and anyone within the Nazi party who doesn't agree with him, right? That's the night of long knives, right? Everyone who doesn't agree with Hitler or might challenge his leadership gets executed, right? So they're all gone too. What else does he do here? He centralizes the police under the Gestapo. So police forces aren't independent anymore. They're all under one umbrella, which of course he controls, right? And then von Hindenburg dies, right? He's an old guy. He's a veteran of World War I. He's 82 or whatever it is. He dies. And then what does Hitler do? Combines those two offices, right? President and chancellor, right? And again, those two are supposed to be a check on each other's power, right? The chancellor and the president keep each other from assuming full power. But now, there's nothing to stop him, right? The Enabling Act says that he can rule by decree. He abolishes all other political parties. He combines the offices of chancellor and president into Führer, right? And now he's the only one in command, right? He's going to get the army to swear allegiance to him, right? Again, you don't want this, right? If you're ever in charge of a country, any of you, if you remember nothing else from this course, if you're ever in charge of a country, you do not want the army to be loyal to the leader. You want the army to be loyal to the state, right? The army is there to defend the state, not to defend the leader, right? But of course, Hitler knows this, and so he has the army swear allegiance to him, not to Germany, but to him, right? And so now, everything he says the army will carry out, right? And so you can see that very quickly in the space of, it's been a long climb for Hitler, right? Even in 1929, he's been at this 10 years, right? He's been trying to build a following and momentum for a full decade, right? But once the conditions are right, there's really no stopping him, right? People kind of make a deal with the devil, right? They put him into power thinking that he will, garner support for their government and that he will protect the interests of the landowners and the industrialists, and they think they'll control him, right? They'll think they'll keep him, use him like a puppet, right? They'll just get him to do whatever they want. But that's not happening, right? We see very quickly that he takes a wrecking ball to their democracy, right? He removes any competition he has. He makes anything, the thing that might save you from someone who wants to take power is other political parties, right? But when they're made illegal and half of them are thrown in jail, there's no one to stop him. In Canada, I don't know about Germany at the time. In Canada, we have a very interesting sort of system that's based on the British parliamentary system. And so Justin Trudeau is the Prime Minister, and he only is Prime Minister, and the Liberals only have government as long as they have the confidence of the House, okay? So basically at any time, someone can stand up and say, I'm calling I have a motion of non-confidence. I do not have confidence in the government to rule. And if that passes by majority, if the majority of the House votes that they don't have confidence in the government collapses and we go right to an election, right? So when you think of it, it's kind of like everyone has their finger on the sort of abort button, right? The self-destruct button. And so if Justin Trudeau does something super crazy, almost anyone can stand up and say, I move a motion of non-confidence. And if people vote for it, the government is out and an election begins. Right? The same thing happens within the party, because unlike in the US where they vote for the president, we actually don't vote for Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is only Prime Minister because he's the leader of the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party has the most seats in government. So if the Liberal Party, if Justin Trudeau starts to do crazy stuff tomorrow, the Liberal Party can say, we don't have any confidence in the leader of this party, we're removing him. And the Liberal Party can vote to remove him and assign a new leader. And whoever that new leader is becomes the Prime Minister. So there's kind of two ways in which, if somebody starts to act crazy or take too much power or try to, you can press the abort switch, right? You can get rid of him in two ways pretty quickly, right? But of course, again, I'm not totally familiar with Weimar Constitution and democracy, but here it doesn't really matter anymore, right? Hitler doesn't need the Reichstag's approval, so votes don't matter. He abolishes all of their political parties, so they don't exist, and it's over, right? There's no one to stop him, right? And now he can do whatever he wants. And kind of what's scary here is it didn't really take that long, right? Number one, it didn't take long to happen once the wheels started turning. It was 10 long years. But the other thing that's a little scary here, at least for me, is that people were happy, right? Like look at this plebiscite here. 92% of the electorate voted in favor of Hitler's actions. Now I don't know how accurate that number is. Dictators have a habit of misstating what people vote for, right? They kind of round up quite a bit. I'm looking at you, Vladimir Putin, who I think won his last election with 80% of the votes or something, which is never happens. But yeah, people people wanted him in power, right? They voted him in and they were happy with what he was doing, right? They gladly gave up their democracy for this, right? And again, that's worth paying attention to, because sometimes governments get overthrown, right? The military walks in with guns and throws the government out. But here that doesn't happen, right? The Germans give Hitler the keys to the car and say, here, go where you want, right? So I think that's worth paying attention to. Okay. I think that's all for today. Tomorrow I'll come back, we'll talk about Hitler's early plan and maybe some other stuff too. I gotta think about it. Okay, that is all. Pack it up. I will see you tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon. I think the sun's gonna come out too. It's gonna be beautiful.